What if I told you that your biggest regrets didn't come from bad luck, but from lies you told yourself? In this video, we'll break down Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets by Andy Stanley and reveal why the majority of bad decisions come from one simple mistake: lying to ourselves. We'll explore the hidden biases that trick us into making choices we later regret, plus the 5 key questions you should ask before any big decision. If you've ever wondered why you keep making the same mistakes or how to make smarter choices, stay tuned. You won't want to miss this. What is a good decision? According to Andy Stanley, 3 key factors determine whether a decision is truly good. First, a good decision moves you toward the life you want. Whether it's about relationships, career, or finances, your choices should align with your long-term vision. If a decision pushes you in the right direction, it's likely a good one. Second, a good decision reflects your values. As a pastor, Stanley emphasizes Christian values and how they guide decision-making. He believes that good choices help you stay on the path God has for you. Even if you're not religious, the principle still applies. Your best decisions are the ones that align with what matters most to you. Third, a good decision is made with purpose and careful thought. We often make bad choices when we're rushed, emotional, or don't consider all our options. Stanley argues that good decisions come from asking the right questions before taking action, questions he outlines later in his book. What is a bad decision? According to Andy Stanley, a bad decision leads to regret. Some bad decisions have small consequences, while others have life-changing effects. Either way, they make you wish you could go back and choose differently. However, regret only happens after the decision is made. While it can teach you a lesson for the future, it can't stop you from making a regretful choice in a situation you've never faced before. Stanley says that most regretful decisions fall into 3 main categories: regretful purchases, staying in bad relationships, and harmful habits. Let's go over them one by one. 1. Purchases. We regret. We often buy things we later regret. Sometimes these are small, like a sweater in a color we never wear or a book we only bought because it was popular. These decisions are minor and don't affect our lives much. But some regretful purchases are big, like an overpriced car or a vacation that stretches our budget too far. These choices can set us back financially and cause long-term stress. Psychologists say that we often justify our purchases to avoid buyer's remorse, the feeling of regret after spending money. Studies show that even capuchin monkeys do this. Stanley explains that these regretful purchases happen because we let our desires override logic. In the moment, we focus on how much we want something, ignoring the fact that we don't need it or can't afford it. Only later do we realize the mistake. 2. Staying in relationships. We should leave. Another common regret is staying in relationships that are no longer good for us. Many people waste time in relationships they know aren't right, whether it's dating someone who isn't a good match or holding on to a one-sided friendship. Stanley explains that we convince ourselves to stay by ignoring clear warning signs and telling ourselves a more positive story about the person or the relationship. Third, harmful habits. We regret. Stanley's third category of regretful decisions involves habits that harm us. When we repeatedly make bad choices, they turn into patterns that are hard to break. For example, if you always procrastinate on big projects, you may hurt your career. If you scroll through social media for hours every night, you might lose valuable time with loved ones. These small decisions seem harmless at first, but over time they can become habits that negatively impact our lives. Is there a pattern behind bad decisions? A common theme in Stanley's explanations is self-deception. As you've heard, we convince ourselves that it's okay to buy something we can't afford, stay in a bad relationship, or indulge in a harmful habit. Our desires take over and we ignore the negative consequences. This kind of thinking is called motivated reasoning, a psychological tendency to believe what we want to be true rather than what is actually true. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many people wanted life to return to normal so badly that they made decisions that ignored health risks. Some of these choices led to regret later. How can you avoid bad decisions? Since bad decisions often stem from self-deception, the key to making better choices is self-awareness. Instead of acting on impulse, take a step back and ask yourself tough questions. Am I trying to convince myself that this is a good idea? What are the long-term consequences of this decision? If I were advising a friend in my situation, what would I say? Stanley emphasizes the importance of being honest with ourselves. If we can recognize when we're justifying a poor choice, we're more likely to make decisions we won't regret. But why do we seem to make choices that go against our best interests? According to Andy Stanley, the main reason is that we lie to ourselves. We justify bad choices with false narratives, fall into thinking traps, and ignore important information that could help us make better decisions. Let's explore why we deceive ourselves. We lie to ourselves to justify bad decisions. When making a choice, we create a story in our minds to make sense of the situation. But instead of telling ourselves the truth, we often shape the story in a way that justifies what we want to do rather than what we should do. Stanley explains that we do this because facing the truth is uncomfortable. It might force us to acknowledge that we're making a mistake or acting irresponsibly. Lying to ourselves allows us to avoid guilt, but it leads to decisions we later regret. A key sign that you're deceiving yourself is when you notice that you're talking yourself into a decision. If you find yourself making excuses or bending reality to fit what you want, you're likely heading toward a bad choice. Recognizing this pattern is the first step to making better decisions. How cognitive biases trick us into bad choices. Our brains are wired with cognitive biases, mental shortcuts that help us process information quickly but often lead us to incorrect conclusions. These biases make it easier to justify bad decisions because they distort how we evaluate options. Stanley emphasizes that being aware of these biases is crucial to avoiding their influence. One of the most common biases is confirmation bias, which causes us to focus only on information that supports what we already believe while ignoring anything that contradicts it. This makes it easy to rationalize poor decisions because we only see the evidence that makes us feel right. Confirmation bias can be so powerful that it leads people to believe completely false stories. A famous example is the conspiracy theory that Paul McCartney of the Beatles died in 1966 and was secretly replaced by a lookalike. Fans who believe this theory found proof everywhere: hidden messages in song lyrics, album cover symbolism, and even clues supposedly buried in the Beatles' music. But they ignored all the overwhelming evidence that McCartney was alive and well. This shows how people can find proof for almost anything if they look only for what confirms their belief. How can you make better decisions by questioning your biases? Stanley recommends using 5 key questions to overcome these biases. Each one counters a specific bias and guides us toward clearer thinking. First, stop ignoring information. You dislike bias. Confirmation bias. Question to ask: am I telling myself the truth? When making a decision, ask yourself whether you're being completely honest about the situation. Are you only considering evidence that supports what you want? By challenging your own thinking, you can avoid making a choice based on biased or incomplete information. For instance, imagine you believe your partner never helps around the house. This belief might make you resentful, but if you objectively list all the household tasks, you may realize they contribute in ways you've overlooked, such as handling grocery shopping or home repairs. Questioning your assumptions helps you see the full picture before reacting emotionally. 2. Think about the future. Instead of focusing on now. Bias, focalism, overemphasizing the present moment. Question to ask: how does this fit into my story? We often prioritize immediate rewards over long-term consequences. Stanley suggests stepping back and asking how a decision fits into the bigger picture of your life. Will this choice align with your long-term goals, or is it just a temporary pleasure? For example, you're offered a high-paying job that demands long hours. The extra income sounds great, but if you step back and ask how it fits into your life story, you might realize that spending time with family is more important than a bigger paycheck. This broader perspective helps you make choices you won't regret later. 3. Don't disregard your intuition. Bias, genetic fallacy, dismissing something based on its source. Question to ask: what am I ignoring? Many people ignore their gut feelings, dismissing them as irrational. But Stanley argues that intuition is a valuable tool. Our subconscious mind processes information faster than our conscious mind, often detecting patterns we can't immediately explain. For instance, if you're dating someone who seems perfect on paper, but you have a lingering feeling that something is off, don't ignore that instinct. Ask yourself what you might be overlooking. There could be subtle red flags that your intuition has picked up on, even if you haven't consciously identified them yet. 4th, stop aiming for the lowest standard. Bias. Moral licensing, allowing small good actions to justify bad ones. Question to ask: what is the wise thing to do? We often justify questionable decisions by telling ourselves they aren't technically wrong. For example, we tell ourselves, it's okay to binge watch one more episode, or it's fine to spend extra money on something unnecessary just this once. These small justifications can lead to larger patterns of behavior that don't serve us in the long run. Instead of asking, "Is this technically okay?" Stanley suggests asking, "What is the wise thing to do?" This helps us make choices based on what's truly best for us, rather than what we can get away with. 5. Consider how your decision affects others. Bias. Egocentric bias, focusing only on your own perspective. Question to ask, what story do I want to tell? We often make choices based on how we feel in the moment without thinking about how they'll impact others, or how we'll look back on them later. But every decision becomes part of our life story. Will this be a decision you're proud to tell others about, or one you'd rather keep secret? For example, suppose you're tempted to cut corners at work to finish a project faster. In the moment, it seems harmless. But if you consider how this decision fits into the story of your career, you might realize that maintaining integrity is more important than short-term convenience. Are you ready to start making better decisions and living with fewer regrets? Leave a comment below. If you enjoy book summaries like this, like, subscribe, and watch this one.